Hi, everyone. Today we're going to start our journey through the theories of personality. Specifically, we're going to start exploring the theory of Sigmund Freud, who is the founding father of personality in psychology. I'd recommend you have your module guide handy, either split screens, you can fill it out as we go through this, or if you have it printed out, have it handy to fill out as we go. Before we get into Sigmund Freud, I'd like to talk about what personality is. Personality really is comprised of long lasting patterns of behavior that make up who you are. These characteristics are part of who you are, regardless of what situation you're in. They tend to always be present. They are also a result of heredity and experience, which goes back to our old friends, nature and nurture. There's definitely evidence that nature and nurture play a role in how our personality develops. So, the man of the hour, Sigmund Freud. This is a picture of him in the lower right. He was very famous for always having a cigar, which we'll get to a little bit later. But he believed that personality was really based on the unconscious drives that we have. We've already talked about his theory of our unconscious drives from childhood, our trauma from childhood getting stored as unconscious drives in our adulthood and coming back to surprise us later in life. He really believed that our personality is fixed based on those formative years in those first 5 to 6 years of our life. He also believed that our opinions of ourself truly come from negative feelings, jealousy, guilt, and anxiety related to ourselves and our families and how we relate to other people. He also believed that our childhood conflicts stay in our unconscious for the duration of our lives, and we have to then, for the rest of our lives, balance how we adjust to the difference between our reality and the stresses of those unconscious conflicts. Personality really revolves around behaviors, and Freud used dream analysis and free association to identify our behavior and why it was happening. His theory and his practice gets turned into something called psychoanalysis. So, psychoanalysis is when you take symbols and words and things that a patient says in the psychiatrist's office and you make conclusions from that information. That's called psychoanalysis. We still use versions of psychoanalysis today. Typically, we refer to them as psychotherapy, but that comes from Sigmund Freud's original theory. He used symbols in dreams as a way to analyze what people were thinking. And he also used something called free association. Free association is where you say a word and you ask the person you're interviewing to say the first thing that comes to mind in association with that word. So if I were to say cotton candy, the first thing that might come to mind with free association might be some childhood memory where you had cotton candy or an event at a carnival or a circus or something like that. So using that free association, then the therapist would analyze what that person says in relation to whether it's positive or negative. So, this slide further explains psychoanalysis versus psychotherapy. So, the analysis is actually looking at the answers, and the psychotherapy is the actual treatment of the person and giving them suggestions based on their answers. Sigmund Freud really had kind of a negative view of human nature. He said human nature was made up of two parts, thanatos and eros. Thanatos is aggression and controlling our aggressive drives, and eros is our libido. Another term for libido is sex drive. Freud's theory can be looked at sort of from the view of what an iceberg might look like. You see a little bit on the surface, and that is considered our conscious level of understanding. That's our conscious level of thoughts and perceptions. Then there's the pre-conscious level that we can access in our brain when we have effort, like memories and our stored knowledge that we can recall. And then Freud said we have this deep underlying unconscious level of information in our brains that comes out at random times when we can't control it. And you can see there's a list of things like fears, irrational wishes, selfish needs, shameful experiences, sexual desires, violent motives, and immoral urges. All of these things play a role in our behaviors as we grapple with them in our conscious and preconscious existence. Freud divided personality into three parts: the id, ego, and superego. The id is the unconscious energy that drives us to satisfy our basic aggressive drive. So imagine the id is like a toddler. All that toddler wants is to have needs satisfied. Like, I'm hungry, I want to eat. I'm angry, I want to have a tantrum. I'm happy, I want to jump up and down and shout with glee. The id operates on something Freud called the pleasure principle, where there needs to be immediate gratification. And basically, if you're an adult that's led by your id, you're going to have that sort of impulsive behavior to satisfy your needs. Next is the superego. The superego is where a person can feel guilt and pride. This is the part of your personality that rationalizes whether or not something is right or wrong. So, for example, if I want to have the last piece of cake, my superego might say to me, "You already had a piece of cake. You shouldn't have the last piece because your little sister didn't have any yet. You should save that last piece of cake for them." So, that superego is going to be that conscience part of your brain. And then last is the ego. The ego is your reality principle, and the ego makes decisions between the id and the superego. So this is your ideal self. This is who you are, and you make decisions based on what your superego and id are telling you to do. So, if you've ever seen a cartoon where the character has an angel on one shoulder and the devil on the other shoulder, imagine the id is the devil that's whispering in your ear saying, "Oh, just eat the cake, it won't matter." And the superego is the angel on the other shoulder saying, "But if you eat the cake, your sister's going to be so disappointed that they didn't get a chance to have any cake." And then your ego is going to make the actual decision. This is portrayed in cartoons and TV shows all the time. That might help you remember the id is the devil and the superego is like the angel. Here's another image that sort of just represents what the id, ego, and superego are doing. So the superego there on the right is saying, "You can't have it, it's not right." The id is saying, "I want it now," and has that impulse behavior. And then you, as the ego, are deciding, "I need to decide what my plan is to get this accomplished." Here's another image of the iceberg that shows you where the id, ego, and superego belong. So the id is unconscious, it's impulsive, and it comes out. And if you don't have a very good filter, it might come out more often than others. And that's in your unconscious mind. In your preconscious is the superego. And then the ego floats through all three levels. It's your self reality principle, so it can float all the way to conscious, preconscious, and unconscious. Now, Freud says that our issues in adulthood are caused by unresolved problems of early childhood. And essentially, we go through psychosexual stages where libido, or that sex drive or sexual energy, is focused on a different erogenous zone. I'll get more into that as I talk through the different stages. But going through these stages is what identifies where the conflicts arise. If you successfully go through the stages, you don't have conflict. If you struggle with the stage, you may have more conflict. If you have conflict in passing between your stages of Freud's theory, you can develop a fixation. A fixation is where you become stuck and you develop a behavior to cope with the stress of whatever that fixation is. Again, I'll get into examples of that when I talk about the different stages. This is a definition of libido again: sexual energy, sex drive, and the erogenous zone is where someone gets pleasure from that particular stage of Freud. Here's the list of stages we're going to go through: oral, anal, phallic, latent, and genital. These were Freud's stages. These were his titles and how he described them. So, first is the oral stage. These stages make sense because they're based on what a child does during this stage to learn how to do a new skill. So, birth to age 2, the libido, or where a person gets pleasure, is through their mouth. They get pleasure from their mouth because that's where they're going to be learning how to eat. That's where, if you think about a baby, they're always putting toys in their mouth. They're learning about textures and different things by using their mouth. So, if someone goes through their oral stage effectively, they're not going to have any issues with oral fixation. Kids that develop habits like nail biting, chewing on pencils, or other things like chewing gum all the time, that could be considered a fixation that would have developed from this stage. That could come from a baby being weaned off of a bottle or their mother's breast before they were ready. And if so, they can develop a fixation in the oral stage. Next is the anal stage. This stage is from ages 2 to 4. This one also makes sense by age because this is when kids are learning how to be potty trained. And so the child finds pleasure, according to Freud, by expelling or retaining their feces. And so it's really important to potty train a child at the right time. Otherwise, if they are potty trained too soon, they can become anal retentive or a type A personality where they want to withhold and be really uptight and a control freak. That would be the fixation that happens. Or if they're potty trained too late, they can become something called anal expulsive, where they just want to share their feces with the world. And so they become wanting to overshare and be over clingy and over attached to people. And that would be anal expulsive if they are potty trained too late. These are just the terms I explained: anal expulsive and anal retentive. This is where we get type A and type B personalities from. Ages 3 to 6 is the phallic stage. So during this stage, the child develops a desire for a parent of the opposite sex. So what this means is the child starts at age 3 realizing, oh, I have the same genitals as my same sex parent. But then when they start to realize, oh, I want to actually be with my opposite sex parent because they learned that this is where reproduction can happen. So Freud's theory was that we actually fall in love with our same sex parent first, and then we become jealous that the parent of the same sex gets to be with our opposite sex parent, and we start to idolize that. There's something called the Oedipus and Electra complex. There's a video here that explains it that you can check out if you wish, but essentially this is where his theory comes from, is this idea that we start out idolizing our same-sex parent and then idolize our opposite-sex parent as we realize the genitals fit together for a heterosexual relationship. Freud would also argue that if someone was homosexual, it was because they didn't have a successful passage through the phallic stage, where a person would learn to idolize the opposite sex parent instead of the same sex parent. In the phallic stage, Freud also said that men have castration anxiety as a fixation, where they're worried about being challenged and not showing they are strong enough or that they are manly enough. That can be an anxiety, and that women can have penis envy, that women want to be men ultimately, and Freud said that that resulted in penis envy with women. The last stage is the latency stage, which is the ages 6 through 11. And this is where children don't have fixation, they don't have any sexual conflicts. They are building relationships with the same sex kids, and they are learning how to build relationships, and there's no sexual tension in this stage. And once you're an adult, you're in the genital stage. This is from puberty on, and there's no fixations because this is your adulthood where your purpose is to reproduce. So I will post this PowerPoint online also, so you can click through and get the notes if you need. More on Freud next time.